I verified that I have fuel pressure going into my fuel distributor, and when I press down on this plate, I can verify that I'm getting fuel pressure to each of my injectors. So one thing that I had to do after doing all of this was I had to remove the tamper-proof plug. Someone had already gone through and attempted to drill it out, but stopped halfway, and that made my life quite a bit more difficult. I ended up having to remove this complete housing and take it apart to knock out this tamper-proof plug from the backside. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind if you are going to be disassembling this unit, you need to make sure that this is as close to frictionless as possible, because you don't want this to stick in any position, because that could cause unintended acceleration or it could cause sticky throttle, and nobody wants that. You also want to make sure that these flathead screws that apply tension to the pivot bar that runs through the center, you want to make sure that those are nice and tight. You definitely do not want those coming out and dropping down into your intake. Same thing with this metal plate that sits underneath the swing arm. You want to make sure that that flathead screw is nice and tight and doesn't go anywhere. The other thing that I'll be doing is I will be going through and getting a fresh gasket installed, because I don't want to be fighting any vacuum leaks when I'm trying to set the idle. For those of you that are wondering, this is the little tamper-proof plug, all that was left of it after they had tried to drill it out. Sometimes you're able to drill a small hole and fit a sheet metal screw into that plug and lever it out, but in this case I had to knock it out from the backside, and that's all that was left of it. So down inside of there on the swing arm, there's a 3mm Allen that we can now access and make our adjustments. So we'll get a fresh gasket installed and get this intake housing back together. I've got my fuel distributor housing reinstalled. All of my bolts are nice and tight with a fresh gasket. I've got my fuel distributor installed, making sure to align that center plunger correctly, that it hasn't dropped down. And I've got all my connections tight for all of my individual fuel lines. Next, I will jumper the RPM relay to build up fuel pressure to my fuel distributor, make sure that I don't have any leaks anywhere. Now you saw me pushing down on the plate there. That's just helping to get all of the air out of the system, making sure that each of my injector lines has plenty of fuel, getting all the air bubbles out of it. So next we should be able to give it a start. All right, first startup of the DeLorean. Well, it runs a little rough. I'm just happy to have this thing up and running. This has been a long process after replacing the complete fuel system, going through and making sure that I have everything set correctly. Making sure that I've done this fuel system correctly is a big weight off my mind. We're not leaking any fuel onto the ground or anywhere. We're not smoking anywhere. So it's a great start. There's definitely some more fine tuning to do. I've got a dwell meter ordered so that way I can adjust this idle perfectly. This is the first time this engine has been running over a year. We got it up to operating temperature. Our fans kick on at about 175 degrees. I was going through with the temperature gun, checking coolant into and out of the block, into and out of the radiator, and everything looks good there. No leaks underneath the car that I'm seeing right now, so that's always a great sign. But something to keep in mind with a car like this is when I order parts, I usually have to wait a week to get those parts. So we didn't have everything all at once. We kind of pieced it together as we went. So a couple more minor adjustments to make on this vehicle. Once I get that dwell meter in, I can get this idle set correctly. But I do have a misfire that I need to diagnose now. These spark plugs and these spark plug wires are about 8 years old. They've only got a few thousand miles on them, but considering the age, I'm gonna go through, double check all of that, make sure all of my connections are secure, check the gap on the spark plugs, but that'll be for the next video. In the meantime, there are a couple of minor issues that I'll be taking a look at on the interior. Now this is just a piece of wood that's been vinyl wrapped. So what I'm gonna do is I'll add a bracket to the back side of this switch to keep it from wiggling and playing as much as it does. The other thing we'll be doing is adding a bushing here for the steering column. You can see that there's a gap there. And what's happening is that allows the steering column to wobble quite a bit. So we're gonna try and reduce that wobble from the steering column as much as possible. The other thing I'll be doing is I will be going through and re-gluing these carpet pieces back to the hood. And I also have to drop the fuel tank just a little bit. So as I've got the rest of my interior reassembled, but with the new fuel pump, this cover doesn't quite fit correctly. So what happens is I need to lower the tank about a half an inch in order to make this fit on there correctly. So there's 14 bolts that go around and secure the fuel tank in place. I just need to loosen those enough that I can get that panel installed and then retighten them, make sure it sits correctly without putting too much pressure on those fuel line connections. But I wanted to leave all this apart until I had verified that I have no fuel leaks and that my fuel system is nice and tight. So I've made a lot of progress on this car. I'm very happy with where we're at. The owner came by the other day. He's happy to have it up and running again. I've also got new ground cables installed. One goes to the battery and one cable goes to the factory ground connection at the control arm. I've got the AC blowing nice and cool, which is nice to have on these cars, especially when that little window only goes down so far. So we're making a lot of improvements and a lot of progress. So more work to do on this DeLorean, and I'll make sure to keep you all updated. I want to say thank you all for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.